So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Adam Havas, who is a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Sociology at the University of Barcelona, where he is also a member of the Center for the Study of Culture, Politics, and Society. His research sits at the intersection of cultural sociology, postcolonial studies, and popular music studies. His European Union-funded comparative research project, Improvising Europe, Jazz, Cultural Globalization, and the Reinvention of Multi-Ethnic Identities, aims to explore the cultural politics of musical diasporas in Europe, with particular emphasis on musicians with Afro-Latin, Black, British, and Gypsy Romani backgrounds. Among his recent publications are The Genesis and Structure of the Hungarian Jazz Diaspora, published with Routledge in 2022, and a co-edited special issue of Popular Music and Society on Jazz Diasporas. He is further the co-editor of the upcoming edited volume, The Routledge Companion to Diasporic Jazz Studies. I got to know Dr. Havas and his work more closely through my own research on jazz in Morocco and through my contribution to the Routledge Companion. As a musician and scholar acting in jazz and free improvisation scenes, I'm very curious to learn more about your current research in your presentation, which you title Rituals of Resistance, Transgeneric Utopias, and the Limits of Freedoms or Free Idioms in the Cultural Politics of Barcelona's free improvisation scene. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you very much, Matthew, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure for being here in this lecture series that I was also very keen on watching different sessions on music and academic presentations. It's really a prestige to be part of that, and it also, as I will kind of elaborate on it, it's also it was a sort of a challenge for me to position my work more in dialogue with your research project that I think was very, very beneficial for my research that is in quite in an initial phase. So I'm sharing the screen, and I will do my best to switch on the share sound option, but please, in case you cannot hear it, do not be polite and just switch on your Eric that I'm telling you, please just unmute yourself and shout in the Adam, just we cannot hear it, so I will fix it soon, please, because that can be the issue. So I'm just sharing it now. Yes, first share computer sound. Yeah, it's switched on, so it should perfectly work. And I'm also going for the options. So now you can hear me, and now you can see me, and I can see you as well. Perfect. So thank you very much, and excuse me in advance for the very alienating title, this Rituals of Resistance, Transgeneric Utopias, and the Limits of Free Idioms. I will kind of explain what I mean by these terms. They emerged out of the interviews that I'm making with musicians across the Barcelona free improvisation and free jazz scene. But mainly what I will talk about, they will be like the in-progress results of my postdoctoral investigation that I started in October when I moved here in Barcelona. So basically, I'm going to share some preliminary results of an investigation that I started a couple of months ago. And yes, before that, as Eric kindly said, this research is embedded in like a larger postdoctoral project that is a comparative project that involves Eastern Europe, that is to say Hungary, and also the Midlands and Northern England, because of the Afro-diasporic and Afro-Caribbean musical influences, and Barcelona. So basically, I was very much focused on jazz, but now my scope is more about improvised music, basically, any sort of improvised music with reference to musical diasporas. And the whole reason that I'm doing it is basically because I'm more and more convinced that through improvised music, the improvised musical practices, and by the study of improvised music scenes, we can have a unique perspective on issues of identity politics, of postcolonial struggles, and the interconnection between gender, race, and class-based distinctions. So my overall aim with this 2-year-old project is to shed new critical light on identity political debates and to criticize the Euro-whiteness that characterizes, in many cases, I think, the understanding and conceptualizations of other non-Western musical practices. So by following the noble traditions of sociology and cultural studies, I'm going to kind of try to reconstruct the positions and the perspectives of the other from below. And I'm going to talk about a sort of peripheral genre or peripheral cultural practice. And by peripheral, I mean that it is not really consecrated by noble institutions as other musics are. So just some sort of epistemological preliminaries. I don't know why I'm fond of these very alienating terms, but what I really want to sort of see that, to me, improvisation has ontological, epistemic, and very practical connotations. It's more of an allegory that I try to exploit throughout my research, that I understand it is also as a sort of a genre category or like a sort of taxonomy, which is perhaps the least important aspect in my research. But it's also related to praxis and habitus, this Bourdieusian term that is to say the durable schemes of perception, appreciation, and action. And by that, I mean that I do study the musical socialization of musicians, that how they make conscious musical material and aesthetics through practicing, how they make it unconscious, and how this kind of unconscious knowledge that is embodied in muscular memory, as many musicians know that, it is also how this kind of muscular memory and habitus, there is like a sort of a second nature, how it becomes activated throughout musical practice and musical conversations and musical performances. So these layers of the unconscious and the conscious, and how it is conditioned by social, gender-based, and racial factors. I mean by this aspect. I also consider improvisation as a mode of cultural criticism that I try to talk about when I said that I would like to criticize and to intervene in discourses about identity politics in Europe, which one of my main criticism is that it is in many cases class blind. So I would like to contribute from a postcolonial and post-Marxist angle even to debates that, in my view, overemphasize identity and sometimes forget the complexity of colonial and class-based factors. And the diasporic encounters and the agency of sound, I think the free improvised music is, it could function, and I will talk about the unbearable whiteness of this non-idiomatic avant-garde music, but it is a unique terrain for cultural encounters, exactly because this kind of cultural practice resists rigid categorization of genre and genre taxonomy. So this really is a terrain for transcultural and transidiomatic encounters that could be exploited, and there is a very, very strong political background to that unlike overemphasizing certain identity positions, there is like this dialogue and how these many different voices, this heterodoxy or plurality, how it becomes one conversation and a sort of cultural critique. And I also, the final aspect of improvisation to me is sort of a metaphor for democracy, for pluralism, and for survival in neoliberal times. I think it is also a key category of survival, that those who cannot really improvise, they have less chance to cope with the pressures of and the structural powers of neoliberal global capitalism. So all this is there, and this is, as I will show you, it's more like I try to introduce you as how I'm struggling to construct my object of study. So this is still in the process of not constructing my study based on predefined categories and ideas, but it is my way of building up a good case to study improvised music. And yes, this quotation I tend to show, but to me it's really influential, and I would like to read that out. I won't read so many quotations, but to me it was essential because I think it's like also a metaphor for my approach, that how are we think critically about artistic products and aesthetic codes, which though they may be traceable back to one distinct location, have been changed either by the passage of time or by their displacement, relocation, or dissemination through networks of communication and cultural exchange. So this quotation from an earlier article of Paul Gilroy in 1991, I think, but it's also in the book The Black Atlantic, which is most widely known by so many of us. So basically I also include the Black Atlantic, but try to see beyond a little bit, and also include different diasporics and different identity positions, like including the very much diversity of whiteness. And I think in South Europe and in Eastern Europe, we have different ideas of whiteness as a sociological category that I will talk about that. So first, I'm very happy to start with some historical contextualization. Each time I'm starting a scene-based research, which is based on ethnography and semi-structured qualitative interviews, as it is called in a fancy way. But each time I do the interviews of a contemporary scene, I cannot avoid or escape the historicity of categories that are being used and that are being circulated within the scene. So I really became a sort of a cheerleader for historicize everything, this term that I really, it is just a couple of months of deep interviews and ethnography and regular concert visits led me back to where the hybridization of improvised music in Barcelona, and Barcelona's unique geopolitical and geocultural position, both within Spain and within the world. So I just brought here a couple of examples that I think really are enigmatic for the for this kind of hybridization that characterizes popular music and also improvised music, and the genealogy of improvised music in Barcelona. Because for instance, one of the aspects was jazz flamenco. That is the major first album was Lionel Hampton's Jazz Flamenco in 1957, where actually I read a lot of musicological critiques that actually there's not much flamenco musicological speaking in that album. But it was the period when, jazz flamenco as a sort of hybrid genre emerged in the popular imagination, and also as a result of market pressures. So it's also jazz flamenco was, and later in Miles Davis' Sketches of Spain in 1960 and Coltrane's Ole in 61, it's also a way of how the US musicians saw this kind of Southeastern exotic music. So this is how it gets really interesting to me, that how this flamenquismo or andalusismo in jazz, it's being rediscovered and constructed and represented by key jazz musicians. And I also found it key jazz musician, like, for example, the life trajectory of Tete Montoliu, the blind Catalan pianist that had there is a big, like more than 600 pages book written by Jordi Pujol about the Barcelona jazz scene from the end of the First World War until the mid-60s. And the book in many respects is about Tete Montoliu. And I understand, and really understood why, because already in the 50s, Tete was experimenting with mambo and bolero music. So this Latin jazz was already in the air in times of Franco's dictatorship. And he was a pioneer in that music as well. He also plays the piano in 2 or 3 tunes in Lionel Hampton's Jazz Flamenco, even though he's not shown in the album, unfortunately. And also, my aim with this kind of historical contextualization is to really to show some mosaics of hybridization. It's not meant to be a chronological jazz history or anything, just to show you that this kind of hybridization and intercultural dialogue is at the heart of the genealogy of improvised music and jazz in Barcelona. And also, I wanted to mention the the new flamenco. I mean, the Nova Cançó, the new Catalan music that was like a cultural revival, as opposed to Franco's censorship and cultural and linguistic oppression against Catalan. So it was really interesting to see for me how, for example, Tete Montoliu issued an album in '69 with Serrat interpreting the songs of interpreting the songs of the pioneer of the Nova Cançó movement, who was also spent some years in exile away from the dictatorship of Franco. So I think it shows in many respects, when I follow the musical trajectories of musicians and even jazz musicians in Barcelona, I see many connections with many multiple genres, and also in the Catalan cultural revival, that if you listen to that album that I had the pleasure to do so, I realized that it's basically a jazz album. And it was so interesting to me that how abstract music can be used in order to articulate a very clear political and cultural agenda amidst Francoism. So this is also just leads us a little bit more towards the real topic of today's talk, that how abstract music is capable of expressing political and ideological agendas. That is one of the key questions for me. And continue with another historical milestone. It was the establishment and founding of Café Celeste in Via de Argentinas, I think, but it's at it's called it's at the Via Laietana region. It's the Born district of Barcelona, and it was established in 1973 to the example of London's Club Marquis. So that was also this transnational reference, that those folks who basically hippies and punks who established this place in that is the cradle of the Ona Laietana, or the Catalan rock music. Actually, that was this major UK influence of that club of progressive and modern music. And this really, the early 70s really meant a sort of boom in the hybridization of music and the cross-cultural influences that I just brought a few examples. For example, the orchestra Mirasol was playing jazz fusion music, and also I think I'm so bad that because of the PPT it cannot be seen, but the album is actually titled Salsa Catalana. So the Latin influence and the Latin music is really there in the 70s, and rock music and jazz and Latin music, there are like these fusions that, and I mentioned this because this was a major part of the musical socialization of the generation that sort of founded free jazz or free improvised music in the course of the 90s. So these are really the cultural antecedents. And also Gato Perez, I must mention, who is the founding father of this rumba catalana genre. He's the one who coined the term, actually. And also, for example, Café Celeste, there was the first Hindu music festival in the 70s, so that you see that, for example, this Compañía Eléctrica Dharma, who was playing in also the Palau de la Música Catalana. It is also something that I think characterizes this movement of the 70s, that I think that it's a major sociological, major experience of musical socialization, when rock, jazz, Latin music, and Eastern music merged through a sort of a cultural revival movement that at the same time was very Catalan and very much linked to the urban space of Barcelona, and in that case, Born, the district of Born. If the reason why I kind of met this, or I had the chance to research this free jazz scene, is because I met a director called Lulu Martorell, who made a documentary about contemporary about musicians that were also influenced by this music. So this is really a part of the musical socialization of the generation that founded. And we have a quote of one of the founding fathers of free improvised music in Barcelona. And I think this quotation, it really, really depicts the role of this period in what I was just saying. It's going to read it out. Just like that, all of a sudden, in 1973, during the last years of Franco's dictatorship in Spain, the first rock concerts begin to be organized in Barcelona. The music is no longer that soft, balanced, and slightly boring that I had seen in the concerts of the Palau de la Música, but it is something alive, strong, and even more important, youthful and rebellious. And it was then that we discovered Miles Davis of In a Silent Way, also electric jazz, and all its offshoots, such as the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Keith Jarrett, Weather Report, Return to Forever, and others. Those were years of great effervescence. I also discovered the new flamenco of Paco de Lucia, etc. And I absorbed all that with great dedication and fruition. We rehearsed every afternoon from school until dinner time at my grandparents' house, because my parents were already beginning to show signs that music was a good hobby, but a very bad profession. Wow. Then came 77 and punk and disco fever, and I lost interest in popular music and started to get seriously interested in jazz. Nothing would ever be the same. I chose this quotation, excuse me for its length, because it really depicts the influence of this new Catalan rock fusion movement. That was also, the German influence was very important, like this Kosmische rock or couch rock. There was a key reference, and the first time when they started to use computer and samplers. And so this West German experimental scene was also a key influence. I close the parenthesis now. But there has been a rupture in the late 70s, early 80s, when popular music went into one direction with the punk and the disco fever. And those musicians who had, like, I think Liba Villavecchia, for example, was studying in New England Conservatory, Boston. So these founding fathers of free improvisation are really professional musicians coming from jazz and or classical music backgrounds, being active in many formations. So there has been a rupture, a sort of schisma between the music, where musical elements are not so important, but it's more the emphasis is on the kind of the political agenda, and the music that went towards the direction of avant-garde. Yeah, and free jazz and free improvisation music, I think that's going to be the next aspect. So we are really getting to the topic, both historically and conceptually, that, you know, free improvisation music as we know it emerged in the 90s, and there are current debates whether it was something that it was imported from especially West Germany and England, influenced by Derek Bailey on the one hand, and Schlippenbach, Peter Cobalt, and Brötzmann on the other hand. So these were the key influences. But at the same time, these musicians had these experiences, as I talked about on the 70s, and just a few informations. For example, in the late 90s, the Improvisadores de Barcelona Asociados, so-called IBA, was established. The Trio Local, that was the nucleus of the free jazz in free improvisation music in Barcelona. It was founded in 1997, 1998, with Joan Saura on samplers, Augusti Fernandez on piano, that is considered a major, like, founding father of free improvisation, and Liba Villavecchia on saxophone. So that was the kind of nucleus. And it's also interesting that the setup, the piano, saxophone, and samplers, so these electronic elements in that, and there has been like concert series on every Monday, and every Monday I say it because I think it also represents the peripheral sort of status of the music in some sense, but in the other hand, that there has been concerts on a regular basis in the place Jazz C, part of Taller del Musics de Barcelona, between 1997 and 2000, and there was really a hub for international musicians, where Ivan Parker, Peter Cobalt, Ramon Lopez, Ferran Fages, and many others were there. And also, it's important that many more ambitious projects have been established with time, such as the Free Art Ensemble, the Banda de Improvisadores de Barcelona, the web page, which concert organizer, sort of collective, Free Impro Barcelona. There has been the records in 2011 established, the Discordian records that has hundreds of, or more than 100 of independent records of this genre. And there are not many, but there are also festivals such as the Barcelona Improv Fest, which existed between 2006 and 2019. And also until recently, until the jubilation or jubilación, I don't know the term now, but until Agustí Fernández went to pension from Escola Superior de Música de Catalunya, there has been a postgraduate course in improvisation, where led by Agustí Fernández, if I'm correct, but also Liba Villavecchia and Nuria Andorra, the drummer, were having courses. So even with time, there has been a sort of institutional consecration and legitimization of free improvised music. So there are now newer and newer generations. In my interviews, and this is the last aspect of contextualization, I'm talking from the position of the sociologist. So for me, it was very interesting to kind of understand the music within the urban context of Barcelona, and within the context of the larger controversies of Barcelona as a city that is described by the anthropologist Manuel Delgado, and I'm quoting, Barcelona, explains the author, is a top model, a woman who has been trained to remain attractive and seductive, who puts on makeup to later exhibit herself or be exhibited on the catwalk of the fashion cities, the most fashionable in urban matters. This is the Barcelona success, the one that is in fashion, as shown by the fascination it arouses in tourists from all over the planet who visit it. But Barcelona is also a model of other things, which is the social concessions do not disguise. All the processes of transformation that the city has undergone have certainly made it a model, but a model of how a city is conceived only as power and money, which with its back turned to the most pressing problems of its inhabitants and the prospect of raising the levels of justice and freedom. The failure of a city that stands blind to the miseries it shelters, deaf and dumb to the exclusions it endlessly generates, and so on and so forth. So Barcelona model, as it is usually referred to, is a very ambiguous and complex model that also includes, as I read in an article of Matthew, that interculturalism has been invoked as a major policy tool to integrate immigrant minorities into a more respectful and dignified environment. I had this quotation from the musical bridge, Intercultural Regionalism, the Immigration Challenge in Andalusia. And I think that I looked for some references of Barcelona, and I think it's very much true. I read many articles that are really discuss Barcelona's unique cultural policies and integration, and how the role of culture in such processes. But at the same time, and also based on my interviews, the top-down level says quite differently in many cases about the experience of not getting funding, of being totally invisible, of not getting support. So that's why, to me, the embeddedness of these micro scenes, because the free improv scene in Barcelona is made up of a couple of like 2, 3, 4 micro scenes, so to speak, that are really related to contemporary places or ateneus, these sort of civic centers that organize various political and ideological processes. I won't talk about Barcelona's like that major event of the Barcelona Olympia, but just one aspect to see that it's really impossible to talk about even such a marginal genre such as free improvised music in Barcelona without the interrelations of genres and different cultures that in the inauguration of the Barcelona Olympic ceremony, there was also Furas dels Baus, this famous avant-garde theater ensemble that was involved, and they are also influenced by this progressive and jazz rock epoch. And also avant-garde musicians were there, for example, Carles Santos, who is a major figure in avant-garde music. That was so the image that Barcelona constructs of itself is actually part of this unique avant-garde that involves theater, a contemporary classical music, free music, minimalism, and Barcelona's modernism as a sort of cultural identity. So I will talk about this more in detail. And now my ethnographic research, finally. Sorry for making all this way, but this was the kind of the contextualization that was needed for myself, for the very selfish reason that I understand the very context when I talk to a musician, when I go to a place, and when I make interviews about their musical socialization, that how they encountered free jazz and why they opted for free improvised music instead of being in a more safe position in an orchestra or in a jazz band, maybe. I really needed to know all this background to have a meaningful discussion. So I think it's important. And now my research that I'm going to talk about is basically in two places in one street. It's called Carrer dels Hortes, and in a library, a small sort of a collectivist library. It's called La Social, and in front of it an Ateneo Cooperativo, which is called La Base. And these are the two main locations that were for me the lied in the heart of how I started to visit concerts on a weekly basis. And thanks to a person of key importance called Marianne Brühl, who is an organizer, was an organizer of concerts in the past more than 2 decades in Barcelona, and this Swiss-born emigre who also was part of the anti-Francoist movement in the 60s, had a major role. He's the abuela, the grandmother of free jazz musicians here, a beloved person, a purist, an anarchist, free woman, who is really the heart of this scene. And I met through her, and I met with her, and to tell you, and we started to talk for months before the concerts, after the concerts. I would go to home with her, grabbing by the arm and walking and talking about politics and issues of improvisation. And it was a very, very intimate relationship with me, with Marianne. And this talk is also an honor for her legacy. And this is the only person whom I didn't make signing a contract form with the interviews, because you are obliged to ask your interviewees to sign a consent form, excuse me. And here I felt something that unique in a way that I felt like it's not adequate. And the paradox and the irony is that she was like one of the most important, if not the most important, sources of information, but certainly the person I spent the most time discussion issues with. So I went home and made my notes, and even made a lot of notes while I was talking with her. And this presentation is about that. So let me quote from the dissertation of Amedeo Clotet, who is an amazing free improvised music avant-jazz a guitarist, who wrote a dissertation, MA thesis on free improvised music Barcelona, and she also interviewed, the only non-musician she interviewed was Marianne, and this is how she presents Marianne. I think it's very adequate. Anyone who has ever been to Robador 23, that's a place, or Soda, that's another place, the bastions of improvised music in Barcelona, knows Marianne. She discovered improvisation 20 years ago at a concert by Agustí Fernández, with the cream of the international improv music scene, where she found music that was always different and is now one of the most loyal followers of the local scene. She worked at the Ruedo Ibérico, the anti-Francoist publishing house founded in 1961 in Paris by Spanish exiles. She is not an easy spectator to please. She asks improvisers for audacity and assures that in Barcelona, people play with a special rage or anger. If she doesn't like a concert, Marianne gets up and leaves. I don't have time to waste on things that don't interest me, said he. And this is like very much what Marianne. So through her, one key aspect that I will talk, and I will shut up for now because I will show you some music, finally, after all, that I was making during the concerts in various places, so that you have an impression of this music in its reality. That this music has a very strong connection of anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism in Barcelona, which is a canonized culture. The first concert that is mentioned in Amílcar Clotet's thesis is actually a concert that was organized to celebrate in memory as a memory of Durruti's death anniversary, who was a Bonaventura Durruti was a very important iconic anarchist figure who died in the Civil War. And this was the concert with Evan Parker, Peter Kovács, Augusti Fernandez, and others. This concert was organized in honor of Durruti. So there are many, many historical lines that connect this scene to that movement and to anti-establishment political agendas and to cultural criticism of that sort. And even the genesis of that music is that, which is another aspect that I really look forward to discover further in my research. So music, excuse me, music. Can you hear that?
No, you need to share your sound, Adam.
Okay, because I did share my sound.
You tick that little box.
Yeah.
It works, I guess, Matthew.
It works?
I think, I mean, I can listen to it. I don't know about the others.
It works for me too. Might
Oh,
be
okay.
an internet connection.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Adam. Carry on.
Oh, okay, cool. Great. Oh. So that you kind of get the idea of how a regular concert atmosphere looked like. I show some more short clips for you. Oh. because I'm running out of time, I'm just really showing some impressions of the textures and the musical environments that I will try to wrap up. Eric, how much time do I have?
I think you have 10 minutes.
Oh, amazing. Okay, let's see if I can make it out up to 12, maybe. This is another one. More. Yes. And the last one of this one, I'm just searching for the time codes. That was Sonia Sanchez, the dancer, the contemporary and flamenco dancer, and Agustí Fernandez, who I said that the founding father of free improvised music. Really, for you to have an idea about the kind of the musical soundscape that I'm been visiting and seeing, and also I think that the last performance was either Anna Subirana, Emilian Felix, and Eduard Altava on bass, and for me it was the aspect of the showing you a little bit of at least just a few of the very context in which free improvised music is present, both in terms of orchestration, both in terms of gender diversity, both in terms of the very physical spaces in which they take place. For example, the civic social centers that have a clear anti-establishment and a local collectivist agenda that try to promote resilience against neoliberalism in the city, also through cultural activities, and to see that through the dance performance that this music has also very interesting interactions with contemporary, not just cinema, but in theater and dancing. And also it's a way of for non-orthodox flamenco dancers to explore the legacy of flamenco as which has a very nationalized, commercialized, even institutionalized aspect as a legitimate national culture, to deconstruct it and to apply it through displacement, apply it within different cultural contexts to articulate new meanings through the cultural dialogue, actually, between contemporary flamenco dancing or using gestures, at least from this. So there is a huge variety of context for me. And I really will wrap up soon. I ask questions about aesthetics, politics, race, gender, and class, institutionalization, and mainly I was interested in the very tensions that to me what made it really interesting is that there are no really textbook answers to any of these questions that I pose. That, for example, this music, how can it escape the intellectualism, the whiteness, the Euro whiteness that it kind of transmits based on this very abstract, non-idiomatic music? And also at the same time, this very, very tension between the Poble collectivist nature and anarchist nature and this direct political agenda, so to speak, and the sort of and the whiteness and, so to speak, elitism of the music. So I think that's one of the tension that is left for me to explore, because I feel that it's a very interesting aspect of that. Also, the aesthetics of error and spontaneity. Is it possible to create an aesthetics of this free improvised music? And with the courtesy of Anna Subirana, the singer I interviewed, she allowed me to make a photo and also to showcase this in the early 90s, when Peter Koval, the German double bass player, visited Barcelona, and Agustí Fernández, all these others. They actually created their own way of preparing for performances, the role of conduction, the role of collective words, and how, so that has a very core technical aspects to that. All the musicians I showed you, they are institutionally educated, absolute professionals who are active in many fields. The first saxophone player, Marceli Bayer, who played a gig with João Braz, he actually made an album featuring Lee Konitz. So these are really familiar with other idioms, but they are at the same time are attracted to free improvisation as the most radical form of expression, this excite music, this music for the present. So that's why I use music rituals, because it is not just an aesthetic form of expression, but it's also understood as a ritual in a more spiritual sense. It's also about the aesthetics of spontaneity and error. It's also about the experimenting the limits of dialogue and reflections. You have to be a very prepared musician to be able to react on other musicians' very spontaneous things. You don't know what's going to do next, even though you have some basic aspects. And since my music is really much about also diaspora and diasporization, I'm interested about, and this is what Flourish is, I believe, interested in his research about the Netherlands and postcolonial aspects, that how this kind of whiteness of non-idiomatic music, that to what extent it can function to promote intercultural dialogue. Because maybe the very question is, in a way, embedded within a sort of Western epistemic narcissism, that why, of course, there is no rhythm, there is no, there is no resonance with more traditional cultural backgrounds, and why would it be the music of the diaspora, those who immigrate to find their way in Europe? Why this marginal music that won't give you any financial benefit? It takes you, as a matter of fact. It doesn't give you social prestige. It's anti-establishment in many ways. Why would it be attractive for migrant diaspora? And this is a question, because I have, and all the musicians I'm talking with, they have answers of both pro and con. And even though there are a couple of diaspora musicians coming from all over the world, from Australia, from Japan, from Afro diasporas, and Latin America as well, and New Zealand, it is an issue, so to speak, that while, for example, the GOAT sessions, which is an amazing free jazz initiative in the club Synesthesia, there was an agenda that the gender representation of the groups must be 50-50. More when they can do that, they really had it consciously. They can't really do that with race. And I'm not saying that, for example, Beatrice knows that I'm a big critic of quantitative, like quota discourses, but I was very curious that in a city which is such full of migration, and especially Latin American migration, even this year, Ukrainian migration was at the top according to most recent statistics of the Spanish Statistical Institute, but that's due to the war. But there is the second place is for Latin American migration to Spain. Why is it still not so common for? And this is, I think, what makes me curious about the absence of a scene which is very open and very collectivist. So then, hence, yet another paradox to be explored, I think, both in a comparative European sense, that about the intellectualism and the whiteness of this sort of music, despite its ideology. So I wrap up here. These are mainly the questions that I wanted to raise. I also wanted to just very quickly show you that the displacement of this diaspora, that in Hungary, musicians led by Péter Ajtai are creating a very interesting project called Kian, which was the female slaves also in Al-Andalus region, but in the Islamic world. And they were not just slaves. Many of them became, and some of them became nobles, and they had like this amazing musical culture. They were a class of women trained as entertainers, which existed in pre-modern Islamic world, and it was present in the Caliphate Cordoba. He intended to be trained in Cordoba rather than imported after training, and slaves are no longer found in Al-Andalus in the 14th century. And this music, as a sort of search of identities, Jewish Sephardi identities, is representing in Hungary. I think you will hear the contrast when I show you that, and then I close. Yes. So for you to have an idea that the non-idiomatic nature is not written, it is not omnipresent in Europe, and this sort of cultural hybridity and cultural foundations found in Al-Andalus and from Derek Bailey's non-idiomatic music to Hungarian folk-motivated, Bartók-oriented free jazz. There is this whole universe within Europe that is a global music, and there is a free music, and this is an avant-garde music, and this is an anti-establishment music that is built on these diasporic musical influences that I aim to discover more in detail, both in terms of idiomatic and non-idiomatic music, and also in terms of at a comparative level, based on the aspects and the tensions and the paradoxes and the ambiguities that I try to really just outline here as a part of this presentation of my in progress results. And really, I also want to thank Marianne Brühl, who just before turning 88 died in March, passed away, and much of this ethnographic research that I was doing is coincides with the last winter of Marianne Brühl. In this couple of months that I was listening, and this is the altar that fellow musicians mounted to honor her legacy and to keep the spirit alive. And I'm very thankful for Marianne for all these talks, and I do my best to keep up the spirit. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the fascinating presentation. Yes, we open the floor for questions. Does anyone have a question immediately? Raise your hand. I mean, I think Matthew, yes.
Thanks ever so much, Adam. That was a really rich presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm actually going to ask my questions now because, as I said to you, I need to head off in like 10-15 minutes, for which I apologise profusely. To do the child pickup run. Also, apologies for anybody who came late. I think there might have been a problem with the time difference because we had the clock change on Sunday, and I don't think that registered on Wix where the registration was. So my apologies if anybody's arrived late. Anyway, thanks ever so much, Adam. I really enjoyed that. I've got loads of questions here. I don't know where to start. I might just maybe one or two, if I may, Eric.
Please,
if I can.
please.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, the first one, obviously, you've talked about the links between this scene, this micro scene. I like your characterization of this as a micro scene. Of its links to the sort of anarchism and anti-establishment ideology and all that sort of stuff. I wonder though where this fits in the politics of independence in Barcelona in particular. You talked about the kind of historical links between the free improvisation scene and jazz in the 60s, 70s and the novel canso movement, of course, which was anti-Franco, but also was a stepping stone towards independence and so on. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, whether there are any links here ideologically between this particular scene and independence and the politics around independence. And the other question, if I may, is about the spaces of performance. Because of course, when understanding any theme, part of that process is analysing the networks that are formed, obviously the actors involved in that scene, but also the venues, the spaces of performance and of interaction and so on. And I noticed in some of the videos, they seem to be possibly in libraries or bookstores or so on. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the physical spaces of that scene, and if there's any potential significance there or in terms of its, the political or ideological connotations of this music. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Actually, these are two questions that lie at the heart of my investigation, and this is the direction that I'm going. Absolutely. But first, when I was start with a little bit personal, I was a bit scared at first when I arrived to Barcelona. I thought that I'm going to get a flat and get my papers done in 1 week, and then I just, you know, do this research that I wanted to do all my life. And I was visiting a lot of concerts, and I didn't really feel the chemistry between my expectations and what I was listening, like in more traditional jazz wise. And then through networks and through lots of coincidences shaped by this space of possibles that I call cultural globalization, I went to this place, La Sociale, to this library, to this anarchist collectivist bookstore, and I saw that there are 6 to 10 people similar to this, but less transnational than this even, because that is a truly transnational event. I see the people around. And I felt immediately, instantly, that is the stuff that sort of that really impresses me. And the physical space is one aspect. It's that important. I start with that I saw that this very abstract and, so to speak, intellectual, in a way, intellectual cultural practice is taking place within these Ateneu, within these corporative spaces that are really has a agenda. For example, I had here the quotation of the Ateneu La Basse, where there I show the video of the dancer guy and Augusti playing the piano, that Barcelona has an extensive self-managing and cooperative, militant and revolutionary past that has been silenced by power elites. This is the self-definition of the place where these concerts take place. Our neighborhood, Poble, historically working class with high levels of social exclusion and migration, rich in diversity, with a strong associate fabric and with its own urban structure, we think it is a suitable place to continue with the construction of a new world, utopia, taking the legacy and memory of those who fought many years ago. So it is exactly the point, Matthew, that you asked, that this music in a way is very ahistorical in its practice, in its non-idiomatic atonal practice, which is at the same time embedded within a very conscious historiography and historical lineage of militant political activism. So to me, the places where these processes take place, for example, libraries, that is also this Aufklärist idea that through learning you can emancipate and liberate the working classes, and there is this idea behind it, absolutely. And this music positions itself to this political agenda that I find really, again, interesting. And I went to all these anarchist bookstores that has many barrios have this, and I asked, do you have any reading? I mean, the librarian, do you have any reading of bookstores as spaces, like physical spaces of cultural events, because they do function as such? And no, we don't have such. I mean, you have a lot of books about history of, for example, anarchism in Catalonia. So this is how I learn Catalan, reading anarchist history in Catalan. But there is not much literature available for this. So this is one of my aspects that I find my research innovative, if I can say that I will really thematize the physical space and the history of this physical space and the connections between that. Independence, your first question, that's a hot potato even for many Catalans and musicians, and I'm really interested in that aspect as well. Obviously, well, I think these fellows are more into auto-governance. So what I've heard, there is this kind of a micro scene is also functions in a way that this locality, which doesn't have this overarching political agenda of separation or independizaje. I bet there may be other musicians, but these are, most musicians are, in a sense, internationalist in the sense, and they are not see in national autonomy the key to solve all these problems of neoliberal capitalism. They are more for auto-governance. I think this is the term that they use, and collectivism, which is a very interesting question because I was making interviews with punk musicians in other local barrios, and there I was surprised that very guys and girls were actually pro independization or pro independizaje, and this I think is one of the peculiarity of Catalonia, that even the far left has this agenda of independization, and the far right has this agenda of independization. And I think the free improv scene is more internationalist in a sense. That is my impression, and this is the kind of the result of the interviews that I was making. There is no like Catalan nationalism. I didn't find it. They are rather discuss with me that why the scene is so white and stuff like that, and how we can involve and how we can be more multicultural. But I keep on that, and thank you for the questions, because I think these are two major issues for my research. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. Any other questions? Yes, please. Judith or Judith?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry that I came late. Somehow I never received the invitation for this Zoom. So thanks, Beatrice, that I got the link at one point. So I'm sorry I missed most of it. But what I have seen was very satisfying.
Thank you. Now it is worth it, Judith. Thank you.
Just connecting to this question of independence, I think that it's what's really interesting there is like so this whole idea about independence and the politics connected to it is not as homogeneous as it seems like. So the whole idea about whether nationalism or anarchism or how is it interconnected, I think it's a very I've only gotten into it a little bit by that that Uris book about the networking, about the social justice movement. I remember that I'm sorry, I'm a bit cloudy because it's 8 a.m. And then it just seemed like that there is a lot of confusion also within the activist scenes about whether we are anarchists or nationalists, or whether these things are the same or not. So I wonder how that would be a point, or how that could be a point in your investigation, or whether it makes sense. I think it's just important not to talk about it as like a homogeneous kind of politics, because it doesn't seem to be so.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also I wonder, so obviously very much interest there within, like, you know, the music being political or not, or what does that mean? And I'm also really easily kind of arriving to the point that, like, oh, of course it's political, because look at the spaces where it is presented, you know. But really, like, what does it, so does it mean that the musicians are political? My own research kind of shows that it is just more about, oh, we're just playing wherever we can, you know, play for free, or whatever we are invited to play. And not a lot of times there is like super much thought given to where they are really, and what is the cause. Again, I don't want to generalize, because it is different from musician to musician, but my findings prove that, or like shows that there is a little bit of that kind of thing, that like. So I wonder whether your musicians, are they also activists? Are they doing anything else regarding, you know, being involved in politics, local politics, international politics, or it's really just like, okay, we are playing at this anarchist bookstore, and, you know, otherwise we are not really interested, and not even reading the news, and not really, we're just into music.
Thanks, Judith, and really 8 a.m. I appreciate it. It multiplies the presence in my perception of the audience. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, your first question is pretty much related to Matthew's, and yes, absolutely, there is not homogeneous at all. I really, in the beginning of the presentation, I emphasized that I started to look at a micro scene that is one of the scenes that exist, and this is an ethnography based in perhaps the most militant spaces there, which there is an over representation of people, both from the side of musicians and audience and organizers, who are into political, activist and local collectivist agendas. So absolutely, I think there is not such an issue with the nationalism and anarchism at the level of self-definition. So I don't see, like, I see tensions, but I don't see the tensions between nationalism and anarchism. I see more tensions about what your second question was, that what does it mean in practice and in terms of lifestyle, in terms of how I live my lives beyond music, to whether music functions to legitimize everything political, so I'm apolitical in my life, or whether music is just an engine, a vehicle that allows me to express this political agenda. So absolutely, you are right, and this is something that I aim to explore absolutely further. My impressions now that there are many layers of politics, and I don't want to be judgmental at all. I'm just, at the moment, I'm collecting interviews and making a lot of audio recorded interviews that I will analyze. But at this stage, I really feel that there is a strong level of consciousness of local community building as an idea of resisting global capitalist agendas. So I really do feel that there is this, for example, the Free Improv Barcelona collective. So they thinking more like in collectives, in doing collective events that are not separate as just musical events, that are understood within a larger context of social activism. And I think even the social space is a statement. I think whether I play there or not there or another place, I think there's also a statement in that. I wouldn't underappreciate that you are a musician having your life, you are precarious, and hence, or you go to these places and you play there for free. I think this is, I think this, for me, this is a statement, as I understand it, that I'm not taking this other gig, but for me, it's important to play to 5 people this kind of music on a regular basis and be there and form a community and to promote this. So yeah, and after all, I think that the sociologist also has an agency, that my aim is to also construct through my sociological research. I really want to construct this sort of avant-garde free improv music activity as a sort of social criticism. So I feel this when you mentioned Jurish and this sort of militant ethnography that he coined the term, and you showed it to me, and I'm really grateful for that, because that was an influence to me. I really feel that while I'm discussing with musicians, it's also a process of thinking about these issues. And I think the sociological perspective and my perspective of being from, like being a giri, as always said, bro, it's like a pejorative term from being a tourist. But my perspective, being an outsider, being, you know, a sociologist, etc., I think it can give like new perspectives, and some concepts can indeed be helpful in the process of, you know, kind of clarifying these agendas. So I feel like a huge welcoming from the part of the musicians. Really, I'm absolutely surprised, and my heart is like, really, I mean, that people are very much interested in that, and in my opinion, and I never experienced as such as a sociologist. So I think the role of sociological knowledge is sort of appreciated there more than I'm used to in other empirical scenes. So that's, I think it's also a interesting aspect that, you know, somehow flourish, Beatrice.
Yes, we have 2 questions. Flourish and then Beatrice, okay?
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you, Adam. This was a really interesting talk. I learned a lot from it. And I also have a lot of questions, but I'll just stick to one that kind of emerged from the discussion previously. You were talking about kind of the space, well, these 2 particular spaces, and I was wondering if you just could tell us a little bit more about the street that this is on. I mean, talking about a micro scene, this is one street, right? I think you mentioned briefly that it's in a kind of working class neighborhood, and But of course, with a lot of these kind of cosmopolitan cities, we see that those kinds of neighborhoods are being gentrified. So I just wondered, kind of, what is the position of this street in the larger city, and has that changed over the decades since the 90s?
Thank you very much, Flourish. Absolutely, it's a very valid question. Well, Poble Sec district is it's a parallel metro station, which is between, if I tell you that it's between Plaza España and whatever, Raval, I will tell you, but it is it is located next to the Montjuic, which is a mountain, and this is a sort of very close to Raval. The Raval is the Bohemian, the Chinatown district, where that was a key location for jazz. And this is an amazing book, Matar al Chino, which is about Raval and the social politics of Raval as a region. It's just next to it. It's Matar al Chino, to kill the Chinese, but Chino refers to Chinatown, not Chinese as a person. So Miquel Fernandez Gonzalez, the writer. So because I didn't know, because everyone refers to it as Raval. And and those who don't know the background, they can be surprised that it's Chino. You know, there is this reference, but it was the Chinatown, and this is the Bohemia migration. There is like high crime rates, a lot of migrations, a lot of like isolated migratory communities, and this is located just next to it, separated by the Avenida Parallel. And this is the part that goes from Raval to the Montjuic place. And this is, as you advance towards the mountain, there is this very short side street called Carrer das Hortes, and this is where this place is located. It is this neighborhood. Poble Sec is a historically working class neighborhood, but it's also popular amongst, you know, expats. So there is a massive also gentrification. For example, in just 1 minute, and after many concerts, we were walking with Marianne to her home. It's at the corner with the walking street called Blai. And this is like a typical walking street with a lot of tourist pincho bars, tapas places, very rarely run by locals, actually. And yes, there is this tensions stemming from the cosmopolitan city, the gentrification, and these places, such as the Ateneu de la Base, the civic centers, they really consciously try to resist speculation immobiliaria, that is to say, this speculation of real estate agencies. Now it comes to mind. So even when you go to the toilet, you see that fuck Tecnocasa, or, you know, like Tecnocasa is just one of the agencies, and you see that there is this conscious sort of counterculture against sorts of gentrification, and this is also the consciousness of local, also the consciousness of local issues. So I think the locality is very important, and also that people know me, like, even now, and even you don't have to be from the barrio to be part of this kind of community. I go to the La Base, and there is the bartender works there, and I said, Adam, I have something for you, and she gives me a flyer where the cover picture is Marianne, and there's going to be some series of concerts. And, you know, I feel like there, when I saw the altar, I got a WhatsApp message of one of the musicians that Adam Marianne passed away today, and we mounted an altar. And then I went there, and we got drunk, and we were crying, and they were telling stories of Mali, and I really felt like I'm being part of this community, and losing my, so in the sense, I'm losing this sociological, very, very rigid and scholastic distance for good, that it allows me to see things that otherwise I cannot be able to see. And yeah, so the spatiality is absolutely part of it, but you don't have to be part of the barrio. You have to have this consciousness of the barrios, because all these, I mean, many civic centers or Ateneus, these cooperatives are working against the same processes, to help the neighbors, For example, they even teach Catalan for immigrants, so there are language courses. It's also the name of this civic center is Menjador Social, which means that it's a social dining room. So it has this food, it has charity, it has a lot of things that makes it conscious. So if you enter that kind of political cultural space, you also, that is a statement. This is what my response for Judith was, that this is how it constructs their identity, to act as to feel not as an individual musician, but be part of a collective. That would be my answer to that. And thank you very much, Flourish. Very good question.
Hey, thank you. Hey, Adam, thank you for your presentation. So I was very curious about something you brought up about Agustín Fernandez leading a postgraduate program in improvisation. I got that right. So, you know, I'm very interested in education as a way to institutionalize musical genres. So I would like to know your perspective about this free jazz context as an anti-establishment, as you described it. So how does it happen to implement a postgraduate program? You know, so how does that coexist? Yeah. What's your perspective about that?
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. I think that's another, really, I feel such honored because your questions really reflect that I made it clear that what is not clear, or you know, you kind of really have a good grasp of the issues that I'm really concerned with. And my perspective on that is that, first, yes, you are absolutely right. There is certainly a tension between the SMUC postgraduate course, which is gone with Agustí, to my knowledge. So Agustí was the who ran it. There were other musicians like Liba Villavecchia, Nuria Andorra, drummer who, like, very important persons who taught there, and you can get an elective course such as the improvisation. But this postgrad, which was also the thesis where Amedea, I quoted Amedea Clotet was going to that postdoc, and you are absolutely right. There's certainly a tension of being an anarchist and, you know, all this anti-establishment stuff, and having it institutionalized within Catalonia's most, you know, prestigious. This is exactly the tension, Sam. This is why I'm interested in that stuff. This is exactly the tensions, and my perspective is very Bourdieusian on that, because Bourdieu's sociology said that, you know, you have this heretic group of newcomers that destroy all the orthodox aesthetic and cultural hierarchies, so that eventually they become the new orthodox, in a sense, in a sense. So I think this generational distinction is really there about whether to position it as something DIY anti-establishment stuff, or whether to position it as legitimate culture, versifier founding for cultural appreciation and conciertos en la Palau de la Música Catalana, etc. This is the ambivalence. This is with every modern and avant-garde art. Like Baudelaire was part of the academy then, funnily speaking. So my perspective is pretty Bourdieusian, and Bourdieusian sociology really gives you tools for analyzing these autonomy, heteronomy, generation, and how it impacts aesthetic, racialized aesthetic hierarchies. So very good point. Part of my interviews, definitely. Thank you, Beatrice. Absolutely.
Great. Do we have another question? Yes, Judith, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just to the anarchists in the institution world discussion, I just want to add, I think that it's very practical. There's a really practical reason, is that there you are out there, you see what's up, you are an anarchist. There's no way that you're just gonna erase the institutional system. Like, there's no way. So all you can do is try to get in there and then try to do the harm from the inside, basically, just to talk in cliches. And there's a lot of examples about it. If we're just like looking at the history of the Dutch improvised music, I mean, all those guys went straight to, you know, sitting in on the boards of funding bodies, because that was the way to create space like there is that Fred Motten book about the oh, I'm so cloudy this morning, about basically like creating like underworlds or like, you know, subworlds within the institutions where you can start realizing those anti-institutional ideas, basically. So
yeah, I mean, but
that's all.
I kind of absolutely, you're right. I'm sort of trying to describe describe the space of strategies. This is now what I am. I'm not, I recognize these strategies, and I'm not really evaluating these strategies, right? So even if I have my personal opinion, it's about these processes, whether it is a good strategy or not, what is the aim, etc. I try to really see that the patterns through which this scene aims to give representation to itself and make itself visible and put their social agenda into action. But you're absolutely right. One strategy is creating subfields of resistance within institutions, and that can have very serious impact, like it did, because there is a new generation grew up with Augusti Fernandez, and this is like really like I see the breed, even though I didn't know it. I asked them, and oh, they seem like, you know, like a master-student relationship, and I was right. So there are these hierarchies, so to speak, are really present, and it's very interesting and that's why I'm doing ethnography actually, to find out these very subtleties of that. Flourish.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe continuing on that note, I was really struck by this picture that you showed of the notes by Peter Koval, and I think that you said that this was from one of his visits sometime in the 1990s.
Yes.
So she must have kept these.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, it almost becomes like a composition or something. Like it looked like just something, you know, I mean, it probably took him a few minutes to think of it, but not much more than that. And then it becomes kind of this work by, you know, one of the greater kind of forefathers of this scene. And there's a lot of kind of,
which is kept after 20 years by the local musicians, and they even put it into some coverage to protect it. And it is something that after 1.5 hours, and I'm in the apartment of Anna Subirina, the cantante, and then after 1.5 hours, she brings it to me that this is like a well-protected, intimate artifact of the 90s when the shit happened, you know. So it has this iconic status of these of the upside. I mean,
that can go many different ways. Like, I mean, that can be like a souvenir, like as you say, like a personal kind of icon of remembrance, which can be kind of a good and fruitful thing. But there is the danger of that slipping into this kind of well, as I said, kind of honoring the forefathers, and kind of it becomes kind of power node of power, so to speak. So I was just wondering what kind of function does it have? Like, what did she say about it, and how did she look at it?
Well, you know, it's one aspect was that I think, and it's not just her in particular, but I think I saw these artifacts in other places as well. I think it's, you know, in the 90s that there was really important that British especially and West German musicians visited Barcelona and kind of showed them something that was already very much present there. Just, we shouldn't forget that in many places in Europe, there is this continuity from free jazz from the 60s to more free improvised forms. Like even in Hungary in the 60s, there was this San Sebastian Jazz Festival where they had it as a free jazz category and blah, blah. And Hungarian musicians already went there in the late 60s. But in Barcelona, there is not really a free jazz era, but rather this kind of pop scene in the 90s. And this is how I mean, when you mention power relation or power, yes, but power in a sense that these were iconic, very important figures who could really teach and share cultural knowledge with them, and for them it was very important, and that's why it has an iconic status. It was also in a way of professionalize, because it wasn't just the stuff that Kowal drafted, but it was a lot. It was much more behind that, and much more sort of practical stuff about, for example, all the singers, all the signs that they use. For example, when it's a free orchestra, then I saw the conduction practices. There is a whole dictionary and vocabulary to that they worked out. It was really this Peter Kowal stuff was just to show you like one aspect, but there is much more. So there is like a sort of canonized aesthetics, and also the technical, the canonization of technical aspects that is important. And I think this Peter Kowal memoir just shows and underpins the importance of the 90s and the cultural encounters of German and English musicians or British musicians who influenced the scene so much and sort of legitimized it in a way, because in Europe, in Weimar Jazz Festival, there was already free jazz in the state socialist era. And with Derek Bailey and everything in the UK. So there were jazz collectives and everything. And here it wasn't the case until the end of 90s. So it had a crucial function of legitimization, internationally speaking. And I see that in that I'm not totally lost. I'm doing like this marginal punk stuff no one understands, but I'm not totally crazy. I'm not totally idiot. There are these guys who are really acknowledged and famous, and they always on tour, and they even write books like Derek Bailey did and whatever. And this is the stuff that I'm doing. So it makes you feel that you are not alone. You are part of a transnational community, and it makes sense what you're doing, and it legitimizes you within a local cultural context. Thank you. Very, very, very great question again.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I think we have to come to an end, but I would like to sneak in just one question. I'm talking to you from Rabat in Morocco, where I'm doing my research on jazz music, interculturalism, etc., and musical encounters. And I'm interested just about the topic of migration. It has to do also with like the Mediterranean, Africa, Europe relations. Do the musicians you've met pick up on that? Do they relate to that? And my second question is, are the African musicians in the Barcelona free improv scene, are they represented or not? And how open in a way is the scene for newcomers from Africa, for example, or for other people from somewhere else?
Thank you, Eric, for sneaking it with a marginal question. That is the biggest thing, like immigration, openness. Yeah, sure. I mean, the reason why I always emphasize class and postcolonialism, can't underemphasize that, because if you use the pure categories of identities, you cannot really make sense of the migratory experiences of people coming from Africa, North Africa, or Latin America, or elsewhere. So I do make interviews with diaspora musicians coming from Latin American mainly, and also coming from the Western world, so to speak. And I do see the immense difference about how the border creates whiteness and blackness and multiplies it by 1,000. So that when I talk with the Western, because I think it's important to have this contrast, to talk about the migration experiences of the white middle class, Western, and to contrast it with the migratory experiences of what you say African, and I say also Latin American. And I see a huge contrast. And I think it's not really the issue that the scene is not open. It's a very, if you go there, you visit concerts, some musicians talk to me so openly that then I look them up on Google, and then I see, wow, I just talked with the founding father, like it's so like that. It's so open. I don't think they are happy if there are new people. I think, again, what I said, that for many people is just not possible if you are not middle class or upper middle class to actually enter Europe from Africa and from South America. And I think the identity discourse has this ideological function to mask how the border and EU's policy of border policy and Frontex is actually making it sometimes fatally difficult for people to enter Europe across the Strait of Gibraltar and through the Mediterranean. First is that's why to me, identities will never, and it's not enough to explain that. And secondly, because it is a very marginal genre, a very marginal cultural practice, I don't really see many that don't really see it to be attractive to diaspora musicians. That's why I use the unbearable whiteness of the scene, because it does not want to be so white. You know, it feels the controversy stemming from its whiteness, its Catalanness, so to speak, and its political agendas. But at the same time, it's not institutionalized. And so you have some people, but I think that if you have some people, they may be the exceptions that prove the rule, you know, and not necessarily the examples of diversity. So I think that this is the struggle actually for the scene, and even for me to understand the migration and the Afro-Latin and Latin and Afro diasporic experiences through improvised music. And maybe I have to recognize that it is a very enforced perspective, because I should go to freestyle rap battles, which I'm going actually because of that, where you see the diaspora, you see Blacks, you see Asians, you see you know, Latin American migrants, you see Arabs, you see first, second, third generation migrants in the Parque Industrial, in Industrial Park, where they do the rap thing, improvised music, free improvised rap. And this is where the lower middle class are present. And not in the scene where people, when I say that, where are you from? I'm from Hungary. Oh, Béla Tar. Oh, Bartók. You know, that's a sort of, even if it doesn't want to be, it's very hard for the scene to escape the intellectualism that surrounds it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. These are the most, I think, this is why I think researching improv and jazz and the free and all these musical scenes, because it is not the music that really matters. I mean, at least for me I'm a sociologist, so I can't really know I don't really know much about music anyway. But do you play? Yes, I do. Blues. So I'm very tonal, even though I researched atonal music. But you know, but this is the thing that I think, that's why I go to the rap battles, to see the contrast and to see that maybe my willingness of seeing the diversity that I may not see in the scene is because of I want to see something somewhere which is just 2 metro stations away in another genre that is perhaps more accessible to migrants and working class people or clandestino people. So
okay, thank you. So we wrap up here. Thank you so much, Dr. Adam Havas. And
just call me please.
Adam, yeah, not so fun, but and our next event in the series will be a talk by the musician Ali Keeler. He's he leads an ensemble from Granada, Al Firdaus, and they will also be featured here in the series with a virtual concert at the end of May. So all of you are invited, of course. And yeah, thank you so much again for the Q&A, and have a good day. And
thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm really flattered with seeing you all there. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adam. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Eric, as well.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.